Welcome back, everyone. It is now Module 3, and I am hoping that you have already watched Module 1 and 2, and if you don't feel like they apply to you, no problem. You can watch Module 3. You can see on the screen exactly what you're going to be walking away with today, a complete AI crisis response protocol. Not a concept, not a framework that someone else needs to implement for you, but a protocol you can begin using this week. This model, it's called LAPC, or some people call it LAPC, but I just call it LAPC because it's so much more easier. And additionally, it's applied not only to in context of AI, but it's also used a lot in counseling, therapeutics, social service, and mental health stabilization. So therefore, this is why I think it's important. I want to tell you where it comes from because the context matters. Now, LAPC model stands for Listen, Access, Plan, Commit. And again, this was developed in a crisis intervention practice. Its structured methodology is used by clinicians when someone is in acute distress. You listen to what is actually happening, you assess the severity and the risk, you plan the response accordingly, and you commit, meaning you bind a specific person to a specific action by a specific time. And that is exactly what an AI failure requires. And no one in the AI governance space is teaching it this way because no one else is coming to this form of crisis intervention background. So let me just begin and we can go and move forward. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact me directly. You can also find me on LinkedIn under the same handle name, Tiana Mash or Dr. T. And I'm always ready to read your comments, of course, in the discussion point and answer if you have any questions or concerns. Now, if you see in the next 30 minutes, here is exactly what you will be walking away. I don't like jargons. I don't like theories for my own sake or complete, unusable frame or theoretical lens. So what I like to do is use 6 specific things and what I like you to comprehend and why you need to train and experience with people that freeze when AI systems fail and how to prevent that in your organization or in your small business or for yourself. You will have a structured early warning detection protocol or a triage methodology that usually tells you how serious an AI incident is within your first 30 minutes. And usually a written incident response plan template filled in, not just described, a named accountability structure so everyone knows their role before anything goes wrong, and a complete simulation walkthrough so you can test your protocol before you even need it. Remember, proactivity is preventive, and if you learn to build on the same foundational documents like the NIST Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework or published by the United States National Institute of Standards and Technology in January 2023. If you have not read it, I have, and I'm going to bring the parts of it into the most direct into this lesson. And if you want a copy of it, you can usually find it, but I will get it attached as a link in this module so you have access to it. So don't feel overwhelmed. And again, like I said, I am more than happy and willing to assist you if you need it. Now, I have provided you with the module roadmap and here exactly where we are going to be today. And when you will find each section, all of these time steps are in the description below as well in the video if you need to jump to a specific part. I took your advice from the previous 2 videos. I am new to this area of online education for YouTube. I have taught online, but it's different, of course, because your clientele and your students all come from all walks of life and to different degrees of academic or scholastic background. So the simulation, the accountability structure, the triage protocol, you can navigate directly. So there's no need to watch from the beginning every time. The time steps are also chapter markers YouTube uses to break these videos into navigated sections. So feel free to use them as well. Lesson 3 really points out why organizations freeze when artificial intelligence fails. The question on the slide is the one I want you to actually answer in your head before we go any further. When an AI system fails in your organization, right now, today, who picks up the phone first? Who do you call? What do you address? And what do they say? So hold on for like 3 seconds here and think about it. And if you were the person that was handling the AI governance manual, script, or policy, how would you answer that question? And if this question made you pause, if you could not immediately name a person and describe exactly what they would say, that hesitation is the finding. That is the governance gap this lesson addresses. And you might think, well, who cares? Why does it matter? It does matter. The NIST AI Risk Assessment Management Framework makes something clear that most organizations miss entirely. It says, and I'm reading directly from the framework, that AI systems are inherently socio-technical in nature, meaning they are influenced by societal dynamics and human behavior. So if you were looking at the executive summary of NIST AI RMF on page 1, it says AI systems are inherently socio-technical in nature, meaning they are influenced by the societal dynamic and human behavior. AI risks and benefits can emerge from the interplay of technical aspects combined with societal factors related to how a system is used. It is intersected with other AI systems who operate the social context, which then is deployed and can actually have a counterproductive response. This is not a side note in NIST framework. That is the framework statement for the entire document. The people who wrote the most authoritative AI risk management framework in the United States are telling you directly the human dimension is not secondary to the technical dimension. It is inseparable from it. And the fear that people have is what is quite disconcerting. So when an AI system fails, organizations that treat it as a purely technical problem will always be slower, less effective, and more exposed than organizations that understand as human problem first, human error first, human judgment first, human gap or lack of ability first. Here is what the human problem looks like in practice. 3 patterns. I call them the 3 freeze patterns that you see right before you directly on your module right here. So feel free to read them, or you can skip them if you don't feel like I'm reading too fast. The organization cannot really determine quickly enough whether the AI or the human caused the failure. So therefore, everyone waits for that determination before acting. Common human behavior in conform groups. Do I wait for the boss to tell me? And the system keeps running while they wait. So example is the attribution paralysis. In an AI loan approval system rejected a group of qualified applicants over 3 days. The compliance team waits for IT, for example, to confirm whether it was a model error, a data processing issue, or a user input problem. 2 weeks pass, a formal complaint is filed with a regulatory body. The organization response is now reactive, not proactive. And the documentation trail shows 2 weeks of inaction, inability to justify one's decision after the signal first appeared. The NIST framework has direct response to this. Under the manage function, it states that the mechanism must be in place and responsibilities assigned and understood to supersede, disengage, or deactivate an AI system that demonstrates performance or outcome inconsistencies with intent for use. Now I'm quoting this from the executive NIST RMF Manage 2.4. It says, quote unquote, mechanisms are in place and applied, and responsibilities are assigned and again understood to supersede, disengage, or deactivate AI system that demonstrate performances or outcome inconsistent with its intended use. Assigned and understood. Those are the big 2 areas I want you to listen. Assigned for accountability, comprehended what your action and responsibilities are in case of a crisis. Before anything happens, not during the incident. That is the structural fix for attribution paralysis. One person, pre-assigned, named, authorized to act regardless of whether the cause has been determined. Freeze pattern number 2 is called communication vacuum, and I have touched on communication vacuum in module 1 and 2. No one knows who is authorized to speak about the incident internally or externally. Frontline staff know something is wrong. Leadership has not been notified. Affected individuals are receiving no information, and the absence of communication is read from every external perspective exactly like negligence, because functionality as it is not operative. So what is that? What is an example of communication vacuum? Well, let me explain it to you. Here's an example of a hospital artificial triage prioritizing a system being produced on anomalous results on Tuesday morning. 3 nurses, for example, independently noticed that a patient wait times do not really match the acuity of the scores. No one has been designated to communicate this upwards, meaning towards the persons or managers or superiors that are responsible. So each nurse assumes someone else is handling it. It's like, you know, when you're driving on a very busy highway and you see a car on the side of the road and you are passing by, and this is something, you know, I've had a family member once say to me, well, the next car will stop, and the next car will say the next car will stop, and so on. By this time, the issue has reached its clinical director at 4 p.m. The system has been running for 7 hours, no documentation of early sign or signals that existed. No one can say when the problem actually started and how it was affecting the clients or the patients, in this case specifically in a public health facility. So the NIST framework addresses this under the govern function. And what is the govern function under 5.1 in the executive package? The organization's policies and practices are in place to collect or consider prioritizing and integrating feedback from those external to the team that developed or deploys the AI system regarding the potential individual and societal impact that is related to AI risk. So what does that essentially mean? Frontline staff who interact usually with the AI system may not actually know exactly what is happening because they probably don't have the knowledge or they don't have the understanding to really explain it. So what does that happen? The interaction with the AI system daily are the most reliable early warning detection mechanism that any form of business or organizations have. So the communication vacuum happens when there is no structured channel for those observations to reach the people who can act on them. The fix is a pre-built communication protocol that is activated at the first signal, not after the situation has escalated. So what we see is that AI systems do not really operate in isolation. Their effects are extended beyond developers, executors, and technical teams, and can directly influence individuals, communities, institutions, and legal systems, but more than anything, the labor market and the healthcare access, and of course, the public trust. The requirements recognize the reoccurring governance failure in technology and development, and most organizations often assess risk internally while overlooking the experience for those actually affected by the system. And again, you have to remember this theory also requires for you to understand the formal mechanism when you're actually putting govern 5.1 into effect. The collective external feedback, evaluating complaints and concerns, prioritizing credible harms, integrating findings into governance decisions, and documenting result changes or to the refusal to act. This controls the strength of the AI system as well. Accountability, transparency, legitimacy, public trust, again, legal defensibility and risk detection. Freeze pattern number 3 focuses on the organizations cannot determine whether the first 30 minutes, how many may have, face the system, specifically population decisions or decisions that have been affected as a result of an AI system. So the remediation is delayed while the scope is being determined, and the scope is often being determined by people with no prior inventory of what system exists, what they need to do, how they can connect it. Now you might think, well, why does that matter? Why do we need it? It's not my job. Do you know how often I hear that? It is not my job. It doesn't affect me. Are you kidding? When it comes to public nature, when we are working with human lives or anything that can affect the livelihood of individuals and their well-being, you are responsible. So under example that we just provide, I'm going to give you the scope of uncertainty, and this is an actual case that, now for these cases I am using actual cases, I'm just not releasing name and information, not only for my safety, but also it has to do with copyright issues. So an AI content recommendation system on a media platform begins, for example, surfacing harmful content due to model update that was not reviewed through the standard change management process that we discussed in module 2. The platform safety team usually identifies issues. In this case, they didn't. So they cannot determine whether the first hour, whether the problem affected only the mobile app, only specific geographic regions, or the entire platform. Now what we see is there's no AI system inventory. The scope determination takes 4 hours. During those 4 hours, the system continues to operate. So what is this exactly? The NIST map function is designed to prevent. The map functions establishes the context to framework risk related to an AI system. It requires that the interdependencies between AI activities and actors, people who are responsible, are documented precisely so that when something goes wrong, you already know what is connected to what. The failure not only occurs because the organizations lack this foundation of AI governance infrastructure before deployment, but I find mostly they don't possess a centralized AI inventory. A lot of times these organizations are missing asset mapping. I find dependency on documentation that may be outdated or has the wrong data or information. System ownership records. Is it the vendor or the organization that owns the system? And then of course deployment visibilities, the change management controls. These are operational traceability. So as a result, when the incidents begin, responders are attempting to answer basic architectural questions during an active crisis rather than before one occurs. So the core governance problem is not the model failure itself, is the core failure is the organization's blindness. And the safety team cannot rapidly determine the scope because they don't know. And when I say the safety team, most organizations don't even have the safety team in this place. So map function in the RMF protocol is, again, I already explained it to you, but I'll read it quote unquote. The map functions establishes the context of framework risk related to an AI system. The interdependencies between these activities and among the relevant AI actors can make it difficult to reliably anticipate impact of AI systems. So AI system inventories, a live maintained list of every AI system, its intended use, its affected population, and its connection to other systems is not a bureaucratic exercise. It is a document that makes scope uncertainty impossible. You cannot have a scope uncertainty if you already know the scope. And you know, it's someone recently in one of the videos sent me a message saying, well, it's hard when you are the only one that is not technically inclined. And listen, I have a PhD in psychology, and I have a million certificates from different AI governing bodies, because when you truly want change, you have to make that change yourself. You have to want to be that change. And in order to really advance yourself in this area, especially if you're someone who is working with policies and responsible for human decisions, then you need to always keep yourself elevated and academically advanced. You don't need a computer science background. I spent, I think my first year learning how to code. I mean, like you have softwares like Claude Code right now that can give you some of the best code, and you don't necessarily need to know how to write a code. I think it's important for you to learn, but some people don't think that's the case. Now, let's go back to lesson 6, or slide 6, excuse me, lesson 3.1, pause and reflect. 2 questions. Think about them before you answer. If you cannot think of specific examples, apply the 3 patterns to a hypothetical pick an AI system that you're currently using or your organization relies on most heavily. Ask yourself if it has failed, or has it ever failed, and if it hasn't failed, what happens if it failed tomorrow? Which patterns would you see first? And of course, question 2 is if an AI incident happens in your organization tomorrow morning, who picks up the phone first? Name the person. If you cannot name them, this is your most urgent governance gap, and we talked about it earlier. Drop your answers in the comments and read what others are writing, because the patterns you will see across sectors are remarkably consistent, and seeing your own organizational situations reflected in someone else's is often what makes the urgency more concrete. Slide 7, we're talking about the LAPC model overview. Again, this is something maybe you can screenshot. Now I will have the power presentation attached to this this lecture, so you have access to it. Any other form of document I will also support. I'm still learning the ins and outs of YouTube, so I will, if you message me, then I will send it to you directly as well. And if you are a person who's putting together a governance package, I will be more than happy to provide some form of guidance. Yes, complimentary. And it would be my honor. Now, we build on the solution, the LAPC model: listen, access, plan, and commit. Let me explain why this framework so cleanly to AI governance. In crisis intervention, the LAPC model works because it forces sequential discipline, I believe, under pressure. And when working in a clinical setting, or working with someone in an acute distress, or an organization in an acute distress, the temptation to jump immediately to action, here's the term: I immediately will do this, I immediately will respond, we immediately. Nothing is done immediately, because immediately means blindly. To fix something, to do something visible, to make discomfort stop, the LAPC model says not yet. Listen first, assess, plan, execute, and then commit. Now, that's the only thing that I would add in the LAPC model, is the E, which they don't have. So, but when I'm working, that's what I do. But for the purpose of this teaching, I'm going to stick to, the resources that we have. And let me explain this as well. The sequential discipline is exactly what an organization AI incident response lacks, is when an AI system fails. Again, I've been saying this, the organizational instinct is the same. Do something visible, do it fast, reassure stakeholders. The LAPC model imposes the discipline that prevents that instinct from making a situation worse. It's like we're coming up with a decision that is going to cover or blanket the actual issue or concern until further notice. And sometimes that until further notice takes precedence. So listen, correspondence to NIST govern and MAP function. Govern requires that the organization cultivate and implement a culture of risk management. And that includes proactive monitoring of the AI system for deviation signs. And MAP requires the context is established and understood before and during deployment by the appropriate accountable actors, which provides the baseline against which you can actually recognize when something is wrong. Now, in NIST AI RMF governing plan, under the govern, there's a purpose, and the purpose again is about cultivating and implementing a culture of risk management. I'm not going to read it because I've already used it in my statement, but this is what I want you to look for. Now, assessing to correspond, you also have to remember there's a function to measure employees' quantitative, qualitative, or mixed method tools and methodologies to really analyze and assess the benchmark and monitor AI risk. And when you employ these factors, these measuring factors, the triage protocol we built in lesson 3.3 is simplified, and it's not a technical implementation of the measure function. The plan and commit corresponds to the NIST management function because manage requires that the organization allocated risk resources to map and measure risk on a regular basis, and the risk treatment compromised plans to really respond to recover. So if you communicate about the incident or events, this is what we're talking about, the framework that we want you to use. Essentially, what we're saying is that make sure that the framework that you're using is not just what is it. The LAPC model is how you see things grow together and give it a complete credential, behaviorally grounded in AI response. Now, when we look at L for listen, there's 3 points to listen to the stage. The LAPC model talks about listening is not passive. It is not waiting for something to go wrong and then noticing it. It is a structured, schedule, assigned practice for monitoring an AI system behavior for deviation signals before those signals become incidents. Now, in the NIST framework, what we are told is direct on this point. Under the MAP function, it requires that the organization itself has an AI risk management effort that includes anticipating, predicting, assessing, and otherwise addressing potential resources of negative risks. The word is anticipating, not reacting. Recently, what we saw was one of the largest learning management systems in the Western society called Canvas, or under their business name, I think it's called Infrastructure, that was hacked for ransom. And one thing, I've been listening to different people talk about this through podcasts, some of the colleagues that have touched on it, and one of the things I've learned is, again, they didn't have the proper measures of governance into responding to this, and sometimes big organizations will choose to pay the ransom just so they can protect their product. But again, if it happens once, it can happen again. So I'm pretty sure at this point they probably have a map in place in order to deal or address a situation like this in the future. Now, here are the 5 structured listening channels I like you to focus on. Each one has a name, a role, and a review schedule, because a listening channel with no name owner is not a channel, it's a wish. Channel 1 is about output monitoring. This is track an AI decision and recommendation over time. Flag any patterns that deviates from baseline, especially in volume, in direction, or how outcomes are distributed across different demographic groups. Meaning that if you're using the software and the software is directly assigned to you, you need to understand the name data, the compliance officers that you have to report to, and review this weekly for yourself. Have either a journal. I strongly suggest that you have something. I always have a booklet that I keep journals of, but I also have, of course, our digital note-taking data, where I am continuously sending reports at the end of the day to myself. And this is just to protect me from any negligence or wrongdoing. Now, an example of output monitoring is the social service agency that use an AI system, for example, to generate service recommendations for clients. The named compliant officer reviews a weekly report for recommendation patterns. In week 7, this officer notices that the recommendation for one-time financial assistance have increased by 34% for a specific postal code cluster. Remember, demographic biases or discriminations. So with no corresponding change in caseloads, meaning that no one has reported it, no one in the front line has said, hey, there's something wrong, like people from this particular area keep getting financial assistance and they're being approved for it. So here's what the officer had to notice. The deviation triggers lesson 3.3 triage assessment. It turns out the system's weighing parameter shifted after a software update 3 weeks earlier. So the signal was caught at week 7 without output monitoring. It would have been caught at the point of formal complaint. Channel 2 uses what we call signal capture. Create a structured, psychologically safe channel for frontline staff and affected individuals to report to anomalies. The NIST framework specifically notes that this is important because that human AI interaction results vary, and that is under certain conditions AI can comply human biases, leading to more biased decisions that either AI or human alone. So what we see is frontline staff are often the first to either notice these dynamics or the first not to notice them. They are the most reliable early warning systems, at least in my opinion, for any organization, because they're constantly working with the system. And when you assign to HR or operate lead, a reviewed bi-weekly should be considered. Now, under human AI interaction in NIST AI RMF, risk management, one thing we see is under certain conditions, for example, in perceptual based judgment tasks, AI part of the human or AI interaction can amplify human biases, leading to more biased decision than AI or human alone. So again, AI just doesn't come up with these lessons on their own or discriminatory actions by their own. There's always a human counterpart that also has to be accountable and responsible. So what you will find is, or what I like to explain usually in these cases is, a lot of times people say, I'm not responsible. This is not my responsibility. I recently had a student that I'm assisting inform me that it's not their responsible to check or double work the work of an organization that they're paying a monthly for. But again, we have openly discussed that AI, it is known. Like, it's, I don't understand how people don't understand. AI is known to make mistakes, and they are known to provide information that can be potentially harmful. So this section exists because organizations frequently assume that bias monitoring is primarily technician problems and detectable through model metric alone. And my student is responsible to monitor, for example, what the outcome of their paper is. Now, I'm not against AI. I actually think AI is probably one of the greatest mankind human tools, and I think within the next 6 months, and this is supported by Anthropic CEO as well, we're going to see a drastic change. I mean, we've seen a drastic change already, but even more so in behavioral shifts, decision inconsistencies, a lot of user distress. We're going to also experience a lot more discriminatory outcomes, I think, and we've already seen a lot of over-reliance on AI outputs without people even giving it a second consideration, including organization. And as employers keep letting people go, we're going to see the workflow pressure, and guaranteed a lot of these employers that are, depending on AI are going to go back to hiring more human support. And of course, this is why it's important for you to learn and advance yourself and be proactive in understanding these matters. Now, channel 3 is override rate tracking. Monitor how often humans override AI decisions. And this is a sharp rise or fall in override rates in a governance signal. I think that not just the performance metric that you got to look at if you are in the governing business or policy business or consulting business, and you may see a rise that may indicate that staff have lost confidence in the system's output. Some fall and may indicate the automation bias has set in. We're going to see a lot of decision makings that may be greatly influenced by AI, so that staff are deferring to AI even when their own judgment differs. So either direction is worth investigating, and I think this is why it's imperative that instead of quantity, we look at quality even at the beginning and start focusing on tracking these errors, human judgments, critical perception and outlook. Channel 4 is about complaint pattern analysis. This is a review complaints from affected population of AI related languages. Many complaints contain evidence of AI failure that is never recognized. And this could be through stakeholders, this could be through clientele, this could be from your staff from all levels. And as such, because no one is actually listening for it, so what we see is what we call the garbage file or the G file. People are just letting it go, and we'll deal with it when the time comes. And of course, if you don't assign the appropriate bodies and governing bodies to learn to audit and put a place of what we call lab model or a crisis intervention pre-package ready for you, you are going to be facing consequences, because AI systems do introduce biases. The human reinforces these biases, and of course the interaction loop intensifies the outcome. So the combined system becomes more harmful than their actors independently ever thought. So this is why I think it is very imperative that you think about not only the psychological safety requirement, but also understanding its frontline personnel and its direct influence and early detection that is required. Channel number 5, am I right? Yeah, regulatory horizons. Did I miss one? Yes, I missed channel 4, complaint and pattern analysis. This is how would I put it? This is a review complaints from, if I already did that. Sorry guys, I'm like so tired today. But this is good. Let's move on to number 5. The regulatory horizon scanning monitor usually regulates publications. And of course, this is amazing to have because industry alerts, peer organizational disclosures for AI failure patterns in this sector not only protects the organization, but protects you as a person as well. So, you know, if you're writing an academic paper or research paper specifically, even if I'm writing a letter sometimes for support or if I'm providing a policy, I always use information that can be substantiated. The NIST framework was not written as a static document. It is specifically described as a living document that adapts to the AI landscapes and technologies and continues to develop. That has to be you. Monitoring the regulatory horizon is how you are going to stay ahead of the curve rather than behind it. Now, what I like you to also remember in the risk management NIST AI living document, we talked extensively about this. It's so important because it clears adaptability, accountability, responsibility, ethical practices, AI landscape, technologies, and so on. So for you, just be mindful. I mean, like I said, you feel free to utilize these at any point in time, these power presentations and supporting documentation that I'm providing, but make sure that you are actually looking at it and not only focusing on what I'm saying to you, but actually using it in your own experiences. Normalizing harmful outputs is the worst thing we can do. So we always, as humans, we're very quick to deflect and defer to technical authority or assume leaderships will ignore them. No, you need to be responsible, because we've learned that when you, in module 1, when you're silent, you're part of the problem. And most people in organizations, I mean, countries, we have different laws and regulations in the workplace. So I understand that sometimes speaking or against a situational factor or disagreeing with a situation can actually be career ending. However, I think when you're dealing with human lives and there's a possibility that you could be responsible, it is imperative that you protect yourself as well. Slide number 9, go ahead and pause and reflect. Again, I really like to read your answers to these questions. Listen stage implementation plan, if you have one, write them down, because when we get to the practice lesson 3.6, you are going to need them. Assess. So lesson 3.3, the assess stage, this is when listening channel triggers, when a signal crosses the threshold and becomes an incident. You have 30 minutes to answer and they require your attention. And I think you've been there. Like, a lot of people tend to freeze, and I'll tell you, it's amazing to watch people that are like, what do I do? Even people that you think are in situation that may be stronger than you. And I always say, calmness doesn't mean control. Calmness sometimes can be confusion. And of course, when we're talking about how you answer the 4 questions above, these 4 answers determine your response here, and they do not require technical expertise. They require access, attention, and structural protocol, because AI governance is ultimately about human impact again, and not technical sophistication. So organizations again often make critical governance mistake. They evaluate the incident according to the engineering complexity rather than the consequences that can really affect its population. And in the NIST risk management paperwork, deliberate reject that framing. And if you deliberately are rejecting in building this framework, then you're setting yourself up. So function explicitly under manage, it states that determining must be made as to whether the AI system achieves its intended purpose and stated objectives, and whether it develops or deployment should even be perceived, meaning that if you have this product and it hasn't been deployed and you already having issues and you have to deploy it tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., you're better off holding off and identifying these risk factors and analysis and bounce the decisions with name owners before, for example, opening it up to a triage in a hospital. And this is one of the factors that I want you to focus. Now, question 1 talks about how many people are affected and who are they? And you must think about this. How many people are affected and who are they? And the question becomes, does it matter who they are, right? Well, ongoing harm requires immediate containment before investigation, and what we see is complete harm requires documentation and remediation planning. These are different response tracks and require different first actions. So treating them the same is one of the most common incident response errors, because not every formal crisis management plan is going to work for every single incident. And the NIST manage function addresses it directly by distinguishing between responses to known risk and procedures for responding to previously unknown risk, so unpredictability. And of course, in Manage 2.3, people are followed to respond to recover from previously known risk factors. So we already identified this. No, we've had this before, or so-and-so company went through this. Yes, they may have. You may use the same possible or plausible parallel guidelines, but it doesn't mean necessarily that their procedures are going to have the same outcome and result. So this is one thing I want you to focus on, because question 2 is talking about harm ongoing or has it already occurred. Well, if the harm has already occurred, what is your response, right? And I think that being proactive rather than preactive is a lot more contingent to protecting or negating any situational factors. But again, if someone is not aware, I recently had a policy submitted to me, and I looked at the policy and I could tell there's nothing right with AI being used. Again, however, you have to understand the prompts, you have to understand what the goal is, you have to understand what the rationale is, you have to understand the system. And in order to ensure that it doesn't have a negative impact or harm that can be experienced by individual groups or communities, you have to plan it. You have to find evidence preservation. You have to know the impact assessment, the remediation, who's accountable, who signed up, what is the recovery plan. Confusing these two states causes dangerous delays. And I find that a lot of bigger organizations frequently default into investigation mode too early because they don't really know the root cause analysis. The documentation reviews may be inconsistent or incomplete. In stakeholder meetings, a lot of times questions are not answered or left brief because they don't want it in their notes. And of course, we have technical debates while the harmful system continues operating in production, right? So this is the containment failure because no one wants to lose profit and revenue, but at the same time, we're trying to protect the potential harm on the population. So in operational governance, active harm changes the priority of hierarchy, meaning when harm is happening, you have to stop propagation, you have to reduce exposure, you have to stabilize the effect system, you got to protect the impacted population. Then you investigate. This is why Manage 2.3 control is important, because it explicitly addresses previously unknown risk, because unknown risks create uncertainty, unpredictability, and live operational conditions that is not going to mitigate risk factors. So let's talk about the affected population or vulnerable group. That's number 3. Regulatory obligations, I think, and ethical weight both increase when the affected population includes minors, people with disabilities, elderly, or economically marginalized groups. And why do we even think about something like this? Like, you have to think, well, why do I even care? Does it affect me? Well, it will affect you if you are trying to find a job. And let me tell you, every job you get now is going to have this topic about vulnerable sector, how you're going to protect it, how you're going to discuss it. So the response here escalates automatically because vulnerable population experience a disproportionate harm from AI system failures. And what we see is historically, a lot of these organizations underestimate that harm can come to their clients or to the organization when left with no discretionary judgment under pressure. So what we see is these vulnerable groups are often reduced in institutional power. They have limited ability to really challenge decisions. We see reduced access to remedies. We see higher dependency on the system and increased exposure to casual harm. And you might think, well, what is it? For example, a biased recommendation system can affect adults with financial stability, may create inconvenience. A same system affecting economically marginalized individuals may affect housing, employment, food, access, and healthcare. This is why it's imperative that we take these regulatories and we actually learn from them. And if you answer to question 3 is yes, your response tier move up automatically, not as a judgment call, as a preset protocol requirement. And the presetting removes these discretions from a higher pressure moment, which is exactly when discretion is most dangerous. And remember what I said about discretion previously. Discretion is based on your own personal experience, biases, discriminatory outlook, religious, cultural beliefs, and values. So it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means that although you think you're neutral, in some of these cases, you are not. So therefore, what we see is this flawed in downstream impact that dramatically affects errors and human judgment. So we see sometimes we see flawed education and AI affecting minors, right? We've seen the diagnostic supporting tool affecting disabled persons, or a benefit allocating system AI affecting low-income population. These are actual cases. So under crisis, human decision makers become very vulnerable to normalizing biases, institutional defensiveness, authority pressure, productivity concern, reputational fear is one of the biggest one, and cognitive overload where you're burnt out, and a lot of times you can suffer from mental health breakdown. These discretion during these most often produced inconsistencies can have a diverse effect. So one manager may escalate aggressively, another may minimize the same incident to avoid operational disruption. So what we see is this variability that creates governance instability. So these preset protocols remove those subjective interpretation from high risk moments. And instead of debating, do we think this is serious enough? What we think is if vulnerable populations are involved, escalation automatically occurs. And this gives us consistency, defensibility, accountability, and faster containment. Now let's move on to number 4. And you might think, what is 4? Is this AI system connected to other systems that may be affected? Most AI failures affect more systems than are initially visible. This is because organizations use AI inventories are almost universally incomplete. And what we see in the map function of NIST requires exactly this kind of interdependency mapping, and it connects directly to what is described in lesson 3.1. We talked about the scope of uncertainty. Now, if you remember under MAP 1.1, under the risk management NIST AI framework, it talks about intended purpose, potentially beneficial use, context-specific laws, normal or norms and expectations, and perspective setting with an AI system which will deployed or understood and documented. This also includes specific set of types of users along the way, their expectations, and potential positive or negative impact on the system. So if you completed an AI inventory exercise for the module 2, this question 4 takes 30 seconds to answer. If you have not done that, if you have not completed that inventory, question 4 will consume most of your first hour of incident response. Do the inventory now before you actually need to do it. Because remember, governing bodies respond very differently when human risks are at its highest, and that's something we want to think about when we're discussing it. And of course, let's talk about the 3 severity tier. Now, I talked about tier ratings in module 2, and you can go back, and again, if you don't want to watch, because these lectures are very long, and I'm sorry, I shorten them as much as I can, but I still have to get important content in for you as the listener, as the viewer, really comprehend its importance. Here, what I like you to look at is the 3 tiers, and each one defines a response requirement. Tier 1 is monitoring. Limited population affected harm is not really ongoing, so you don't have to worry about the vulnerable groups across system exposure response. And what I do suggest is you need to make sure you're always logging the incident assigned, the name monitored, date, time, the person, and then set a 72-hour review checkpoint, meaning that if you are assigned to a specific monitoring duty with AI, or overlooking a system, or overlooking people using a specific AI system, even if you do not have a technical background, and I'm telling you this, you learn very quickly within the 6 weeks that you don't need a PhD in computer science or behavioral science to understand patterns of sequence that may escalate or require you to, start upping the incidence. Now, tier 1 incidents manageable are the ones that never become tier 2 incidents. Tier 2 contains what we call moderate population affected, or harm is ongoing, or vulnerable groups are involved, or there is a limited cross-system exposure, basically caution. Right? The response would be immediate containment or of the affected outputs. We want to name the incident, the owner that is activated, communication template deployed internally, meaning you're going to send a communication draft to all the governing bodies and superiors within the organization. You want to, if necessary, you may have to contact the legal to notify them. In some cases, you already have someone who is liaisoning on the team with the legal system, so you have someone representing legal working with you in this particular area. And 24-hour external report that will be prepared. Now, let me make this clear. The IT team is very different than the governance team. Okay, DIT team, managing, taking care of the system. They may even have someone, a third-party vendor, working with the IT team. The governance team is completely different, and I will explain that in module 4. But I do want to make this very clear, because sometimes people confuse the two. And let me give you an idea what tier 2. I just want to give you an example. An AI credit scoring system at a financial institution produces systemically lower scores for applicants from a specific set of postal codes that correlate with what we call protected demographic characters. So lower socioeconomical communities. Here in Ontario, Toronto, Canada, we have organizations like what we call Malvern, or we have areas like Jane and Finch. And the harm is ongoing because the system is actively processing no application. Now, who usually marginalized in these groups? They're usually persons of ethnic backgrounds with low education. Majority are dependent on social assistance because of some form of disability, and other factors, poverty, inability to work. And this is the affected population that we're talking about in this particular case. And this is tier 2 immediately, because the incident owner is activated at the moment of triage, and the AI system is suspended for new applications within 2 hours, and the manual review processes for the past 90 days of decision is initiated. What we're doing is saying, hey, we caught it, we know about it, we are aware that a specific demographic group may be discriminated, and we are going to figure out how the AI system managed to come up with these outscores, the outputs, the results. And this is where you are taking initiative and being proactive before allowing it to get to a level where you need to be inconsistent, you can't be defendable, you're not considered accountable, and it cannot be contained. So their action was contained rather quickly. Tier 3 escalates. This is like red team. And risk treatment has to be compromised plans to respond to it. You have to recover from and communicate about the incident or events, and you're going to have additionally regulatory or governing bodies if you do or are using an AI system. If it's your AI system, okay, and if you're using a third or vendor AI system, all of these come with management and regulatories that are currently in place. And I will be discussing the governing bodies in a different playlist. I'm just trying to complete this particular module because I get a lot of questions when I am presenting, and this is the number one thing that people want to talk about. So tier 3, this is where you escalate. This is large population affected. So we talked about the learning management system, Canvas, and it was serious harm going on. The vulnerable groups were students. A lot of students have their social insurance or social security, banking information, date of birth, a lot of documentation that can be used for fake identification, banking information, that financial information that was available, a lot of private health documentations. These are all information that is held on Canvas student system. So what we had to see was executive notification, regulatory notification with the required time frames. And in some of these cases, when you're at escalation 3, you may even include law enforcement. So external communication prepared, you have to be full forensic document initiated. I talk about full forensic documentation in module 2. And of course, you got to go into NIST management function and specifically risk treatment compromise plans to respond to or recover from, communicate about incidents, all 3 tiers. And the tier 3, all 3 are activated simultaneously. So that means that once tier 3 is activated, you go right to 1, 2, and 3. So now you're taking on the responsibility of all 3. That means everybody is involved. And one more thing about the tiers, the most common organizational error is assigning a tier 2 incident to tier 1 because containment is operationally inconvenient. LAPC model removes that discretion, and the 4 questions produce the tier. The tier produces the response. No one in the middle of an active incident has the authority to override the triage output. So the authority was assigned before the incident in writing in the planning stage. Are you following me? Meaning that no one can override what's happened in the documentation. So even if the CEO or the president says, we're not doing it this way, say, oh, sorry, it's already been pre-approved. This is the plan. This is what we're doing. Sometimes you may have to deviate from the plan as long as you are protecting and preventing any harm to any specific persons or property or company. No, your only concern is to prevent any harm or concerns to the vulnerable section, to the human population. Again, you can pause and reflect in lesson 3.3 and assess. I won't really go into this. I already explained it to you. Feel free to, time yourself because under a real condition, 30 minutes goes faster than you think. When I am working under crisis, I always work under 20 minutes because I always give myself that 10-minute time to then literally catch my breath. So that is something I want you to focus on. Now, the plan is what we say is the final stage, but I always like to include execution, and I'm going to create one that deals with planning on a separate entity that I use with my clients. Now, here the risk management framework states, the NIST AI risk management framework states, and sorry guys, I keep calling it NIST AI, but it's easier for me to remember instead of saying the whole name. It's important because almost every organization I have personally encountered in practice, it says that responses to AI risk deemed to be high priority and identified by map functions that are developed or planned or documented. They say that, but in reality, it's non-existent. So you need to develop, plan, and document before the incident, not during, not after. So plan that only exists in someone's head is not a plan. It's conceptualized. It's the thought process. A plan needs to be written. It needs to be reviewed. It needs to be discussed. It needs to be mapped out, and it needs to be signed up by governing bodies or team. So a plan that is developed during an active incident, again, it is not a plan. It's a decision as a result of the panic or the error or the situation. It is improvised. And improvisation under pressure produces the 3 freeze patterns we covered in lesson 3.1. So your written AI incident response plan contains 6 components. Walk through each with me, and we can then discuss it later if you have any question. Component number 1, trigger condition, the specific observable signals, signs that you may know or identify, or others may have known from your listening stage channels. This is activated. Not vague, not subjective, explicit and measure. Override rate exceeds 15% in any 48-hour period is a trigger condition, meaning that something seems off is not. The NIST measures functions requires that AI risk management measures be systemic, and you trigger conditions because you need to. Now, why do you even need to do that? What is the purpose of that? Do we need to even consider something like that? And the answer is yes. Because just because you have knowledge and common sense, it doesn't mean that other people are going to have it. Now, the intended response to incidents, failure, again, is usually not caused by the absence of intelligence. You probably work with a lot of intelligent people. It is caused by the collapse of organizational coordination, communication, collaboration, and complacent under pressure. So, when you look at risk management framework, repeatedly emphasizes a structure, systemic, and operationalized governance because organizations consistently overestimate their ability to respond effectively during a live incident without predefined procedures. And it's the same thing when you are going to a doctor or a clinic. You know, one of the things that really surprised me about psychology and clinical work that I didn't really appreciate was that when you go and check for a tumor, or if you're checking for if something is wrong, you do blood work, you may do x-rays, but when you go see a psychologist, we provide you a whole bunch of inventories and we ask you a varied questions, and depending on how you choose to answer, like if you're going to malinger, if you're able to be a good actor or actress, like you can really play the part, the results can be very different. All right, the results can be diabolic, or the results can be not exactly what you were looking for. Now, people that sometimes really need mental health or support are not the ones getting it because they're too proud, right? Someone who's too proud, someone who has, a professional background may not tell you exactly what you want to hear. But someone who really doesn't need it, sometimes they'll come up with it's like they've studied the Diagnostical Statistical Manual 5 of mental disorders, and you're sitting there going, really? But here's the thing. We assess and diagnose someone when you're a clinician without actually looking at the brain, right? You're saying, well, you have this kind of disorder, your brain is this, but for neuroscience, you need an imagery. You need to look at what is wrong with the brain, which part of the brain, not just the signals like loss of appetite, the inability to really live life, or someone like myself who constantly lives with major depressive disorder and PTSD, living sometimes can be difficult on its own journey, right? So what I want you to understand is when you're under stress, or when humans are under stress, especially organizations that are very large, human cognition really narrows. So these team experiences, what we see is cognitive overload. We see fragmented communication, yelling, swearing. This is one reason why people start to curse, because they really cannot finish their thought process and they have to fill it in with something that comes up quickly. And if you notice, when people are angry, one of the first things they do is curse. Authority confusion, who's in charge? All of a sudden you have three people telling you what to do. Defensive reasoning, people become defensive when you challenge them, because sometimes their reasoning can be irrational or deadly, and it can escalate situation further. Delayed escalation, because someone is not willing to take the chance to actually acknowledge what is happening. And decision paralysis, which I talk about in a great deal. So therefore, this is why having a plan is so important. And this is one thing about trigger condition. Component 2 is about naming the incident owner. One person, one role, one name, one title, one accountability, and their responsibility. The person who assumes responsibility the moment a trigger is activated. Not a team, not a group, not a function, not their subordinates. That one person. Because in your documentation, that person is, let's say in this case, the main person, the person that was monitoring the situation or responsible for the tiers. Their contact information is in the plan. Their authority to act is defined in the plan. They're responsible. Their backup, if they're not there, if they're sick or they're having difficulty, who's their backup? That's the second person who assumes ownership if they're unavailable, is also named in the plan. Under management RFM 2.4 requires that responsibilities are assigned, understood for serve proceeding or deactivating an AI system. Component 2 is how you operationalize that requirement. Component 3, first 30-minute checklist. Remember what I said, I give myself 20 minutes. The 4 triage question from lesson 3.3, be formatted as a checklist, complete and signed within 30 minutes of trigger activation. Tier assigned, is a tier 1, is a tier 2, do we need to shut down the system under tier 3, which is red. Action initiated, why? Explain explicitly why, detailed, not discussed with anybody else, but initiated with the governing group that has to move forward. So telling the front line, it's a system failure, and remember the broken telephone, you tell one person something, by the time it reaches back to you, it's a completely different statement. Keep it close, keep it confined, and the governing bodies within that group, the assigned persons, are the people that you want to be in contact with. So the superiors, management, stakeholders, ensuring that everybody is protected. If someone is seriously harmed, of course, you're going to have other legal governing bodies, the health representatives, to step in and initiate some form of support. We'll talk about that, I believe, in module 5. So there's a difference between a team discussion about what the tier should be and preset protocols that determines the tier. So the former requires consequences under pressure. The latter requires execution. So when you're discussing it with the team, nothing is happening. But when you're under pressure, you use the protocol. Even if the team is the same team that you have discussed, but the protocol is already set up and everybody's going to conform to that protocol. That protocol is going to protect you from legal liabilities, accountabilities, and even if there is an error in the decision making of the tier, you follow the protocol, right? Even as a non-technical person. So in some shape or form, you have the ability to elaborate as to why you made the decisions you made according to the protocol. And remember what I said earlier, when you work with AI, you have to be flexible. You have to learn to adapt, engage, and then replan, reevaluate, relearn, because that's what AI is all about. Component 4, communication template. So important. Communication is the most important and is something that we struggle in organizations with, whether it's fear, whether it's reputation, whether it's because you don't want to seem in the know. I had a young lady say to me once, she said, even if I don't know, I'll pretend that I know and I'll figure it out. And I thought, well, thank God you don't work with humans, right? Pre-written messages for each severity tier, primal. Internal notifications, primal. Board briefings, primal. Affecting population communication, primal. Regulatory notification, mandatory, primal. Approved in advance by legal counsel and leadership, important. Activate immediately upon tier assignments, primal. The NIST framework requires that all organizations have the capability to communicate about the incident as part of a risk treatment plan. Your pre-written templates are how you will fulfill that requirement in the first hour of an incident rather than spending the first hour drafting communications from scratch. So again, under AI risk management framework under NIST Govern 5.1, we talk about communications, and let me quote, organizational policies and practices are in place to collect, consider, prioritize, and integrate feedback from those externals to the team that develop or deploy the AI system regarding the potential individual and societal impact related to AI risk. It cannot be any more clear than that. Now, component 5, we talk about containment of authority. Who's authorized to suspend, override, or roll back an AI system? And especially when we were talking about organizations where they're selling products, this is where revenue is being generated. So therefore, you can't just be like, I'm shutting it down. It's like shutting Amazon down, right? When their system is down. And under what conditions? This authority must be pre-assigned. Seeking approval during an active incident tier is a governance failure. I've been saying this, I feel like a broken telephone. The framework is clear that the capacity to disengage or deactivate must exist before it is needed, not when it's actually happening, right? It's like the best way to explain it to someone recently, this young lady was expecting a bundle of joy, and she's like, but it's all hypothetical. Well, yeah, you're pregnant and you can go into labor at any time. She's like, well, I have a due date. But you can go into labor at any time because anything can happen from now till your due date. So what do you have? You have a plan. You have your next of kin. You have, your baby bag ready. Most people have it in their car or they have it right by the front door. You have all your necessities. If you have animals or other children, you plan a family emergency phone call because then, everybody gets the call and everybody gets involved. If your family is not close, then you have a babysitter in place or you will have a neighbor stepping in. And she kept saying, well, no, that's hypothetical. Yes, that's why we have these frameworks in place, because we don't want to be hypothetical. We don't want to be working with hypothetics when in reality, once something happens, you don't have time to draft a plan from scratch during that 30 minutes. When everybody's yelling, everybody is going through commotions. Now, depending on what kind of AI services, is this like what we saw with the learning management system? Is this like Rogers, when Rogers was breached, right? And until today, they haven't said anything about being hacked, right? So you have to think about all the different scenarios. Now, mind you, when I say Rogers has been hacked, allegedly, they claim that they had a system failure, but we all know that in 2018 that was just unexplainable events that happened. But for those of us that work in this industry, it was clear, right? Again, not having a system means that you then may have to negotiate, and you create a system or you create a pattern of behavior for these criminals who are becoming more and more advanced than some of the most extreme talented computer scientists out here today. Component 6, documentation protocol. If I have taught you anything in this session, I hope that you have learned that documentation protects you. If you have to record it, yes, go ahead. I always know when my students or my employees are recording me, and I'm okay with it. I give them permission to record. And I even time and date stamp it, because you know what? If I were wrong, then it's on me. However, I also send them a summary of our discussion, or I'll ask them to send me a summary of their discussion, because I want to know if they understood what I said. Because remember, people interpret what you say very differently. Hence why it's so difficult to respond to text and people get really angry. My sister always says that when I respond in my text, I'm being condescending and overtly assertive. But in reality, that's the way I speak, right? In person, I'm a joke, but when I'm writing, I'm very cognizant of how I write professionally, and she gets upset. So if we are having a serious discussion and I go into my serious mode where I am responding to questions in full sentences and full thought process, I come across as aggressive. This is normal. Because where incidents are recorded and are stored is what format, by whom, and for how long. you need to align the 7 elements forensic documentation standard for Module 2 that I provided, review the dates, pre-schedule. This is where NIST framework's emphasis on systemic documentation comes fully to life. Because without a documentation protocol, without explicitity, without in-depth explanation, without clear, concise message, every incident procedure record of different quality, stored in a different location, accessible to different people, and when the regulatory arrives, you cannot reconstruct what happened. Right? So be very mindful of where you get these information from and how you are perceiving and how this information is being garnered. Now, these 2 lovely questions, again, this is for your learned earning, and I really hope that you are taking the time to respond to these questions. And if these questions are also providing you the knowledge that you need in order to have it at hand. So what you can do is literally respond to these questions accordingly based on what you've heard. Sometimes some people will use the different governing bodies of AGI, or you can go to the European or American or Canadian under the government and really look up the information that you need to answer some of these questions may be necessary. And I think you should, right? Again, feel free. Some of these questions may overlap, but I'd like you to challenge your own notion or understanding of AI, right? And be clear and concise about it and how you would approach these questions. Commit. The commit stage. Commit in LAPC model means that after the plan is activated, specific people are bound to specific outcomes. By name, by deadline, by documentation standard. This is the stage that converts a plan from a document into a system. And risk management framework grounds this requirement in its govern function. Governing authorities determine the overreaching policies. Senior leadership sets the tone. Management aligns the technical aspects of AI risk management policies and operations, but none of the functions without named individuals who are personally accountable for specific outcomes. Again, we can pass the buck. It wasn't me. It was her. It wasn't her, it was him, right? So who takes on the responsibility? This is why it's important to plan. 4 named rules. Every organization that governs AI effectively has all 4 of these. Rule 1, the incident owner. The person makes every time-bound decision during the incident. They have the final authority on containment and communication. They document every decision with a timestamp and a rationale. Never a committee. This person is responsible for every decision made during this crisis. So meaning that if something were to go wrong as a result of a decision that they made prior to pre-planning, maybe they did it during the planning, they are solely responsible. Never a committee. Never a committee, because committee, everyone's going to pass the buck, and there's always that one person that takes the accountability and responsibility. And when we're talking about big executive power organizations, you're done. Your credibility is done, your reputation is done, the validity of your work. You could face jail time, you could face fine. And do you think organizations usually will come in to protect you when they have to protect the interest of the organization? Never a function, a person. If the incident owner is unavailable, there must be the backup named in the plan. Assume the role. Contingency B. Immediately. There is no gap in ownership. There always has to be someone. Now, when I'm working in this particular section, I always have 3 people. And if by chance, in God's name, if there's no third person, the responsibility goes to the executive power. So the CEO or the president, one of those governing executive powerhouses. Role 2, the effective population liaison. The person is responsible for communication with every individual affected by the incident. The framework notes that organizations must consider and address potential impact to individuals, groups, communities, organizations, and society. So what we're saying is that the affected population liaison officer is the human face of that obligation, not robot, not chatbot, not emails. This is the person that goes up and speaks to individuals. This is a person that may speak to the news media. This is the person that will discuss matters pertaining, let's say it's health. They may have to be involved with the public health sector. They may be involved with the legal sector. They may be involved with the organization itself, with the legal. They ensure every affected person receives timely, clear, concise, accessible information about what happened, what is being done about it, and what remediation is available. Containment, bottom line, right? So here is an example that I'm going to give you about an affected population liaison work. In an AI hiring to failure scenario, we will walk through in the simulation. So this is just a case study. The affected population liaison is responsible for contacting every applicant whose resume was screened by the system during the affected period. Not a form letter, a personalized notification explaining what happened, that the decision is under review, and what the application options are. In the NEAS framework, this emphasizes on transparency and accountability, particularly at the individual level, making this role a non-negotiable. So I just told you that you need to have one-on-one communication. Yes, but I also told you documentation is important, meaning that after you have spoken to each individual, you still have to send an email explaining what happened, how did it happen, what you're doing about it, how long it's gonna, it's gonna take time to clear this situation, and then you're going to explain what the remedies are, in a very timely manner. And if the time is, if you're coming to your deadline and the matter is still not corrected, you need to send an update. This is called client care. We've been doing this for years. It hasn't changed. That responsibility is still present. That means that is the person's role, right? Now, I do understand from some organizations, these liaisons may have two roles, so they may be direct, the affected population liaison officer, but they may have other responsibilities. In a situation like this, the other responsibilities will not take precedence over what's happening. Role 3, the regulatory contact. This person manages all communication with regulatory government bodies, legal counsel, stakeholders. They prepare any notification that is required under applicable law. In the European Union Artificial Act for Organization and Scope, the provincial human rights obligations in Canada, sector-specific reporting requirements in healthcare or financial services is mandatory for us, just so you know. Right? So if it involves humans, we have the obligation to contact the human rights, and we have to contact healthcare, and of course, if it involves financial services. They sign all external compliance documents, and critically, they know the deadline before the incident actually occurs, not after. So this regulatory contact is a vital role, and I think out of all the roles, this is probably one of the hardest roles next to affected population liaison. Right, because you're actually going to be working with a lot of human emotions and interactions, confusion, so be mindful of that. Role 4, the post-incident reviewer. This person begins an independent review within the 72 hours of incident resolution. Now, it doesn't mean they're not going to be around. They're going to be around, right? They're going to be in the incident, but their role is to keep taking notes for themselves, listen to what happens, observe, document, and then, of course, at the end of everything, they have to review all the incident reports, right? They produce a written post-incident analysis using the 7-element forensic documentation. You could do that, or you can use your own standard documentation processing from Module 2. They can identify the structural changes that is required before the system that may be activated. They are independent of the incident response team. And of course, the NIST framework is direct on this. The map function requires that perspectives from outside of the team that developed or deployed the system are incorporated into the risk management process. So meaning that we still need independence is not preference, it's methodology requirement. So if this is a third-party product or outside of the AI team, or you had a secondary developing group, assist you with the software, they also need to be notified and involved. And that would be part of the regulatory contact as well. So that word adjudicate, it means assessed by someone with the authority or independent to make a judgment. And your post-incident review is that person. They are not a team reviewing their own work. They are an independent reviewer applying a defined standard and procurement document finding. It would be someone like me coming in. Usually you are on the payroll, or usually you are on the what I call on the card list, deck list, and they'll call you, and it's always based on previous interactions. So you don't have any ownership to the organization, nor do you have any direct connection. You're basically an independent party that has to come up with facts and not emotions or assumptions based on what you see to explain to regulatory bodies and the organization, and of course those affected by it. Again, pause and reflect. Write the 4 names right now if you know of them on a paper or on a screen. It doesn't matter. That act is beginning of your commitment, and I would love to read if in it. And please don't put last names if you're using. I had to delete the one person that reviewed my video last night. I had to. If you're watching this, I have to apologize. I had to delete it because you had last names also included, and that's a risk factor. Okay, now simulation. This simulation, I hope it allows you to really get outside of your comfort zone and think about it, because everything we have covered today, the 3 freeze patterns, the LAPC model, the 5 listening channels, the 4 triage questions, the 6 component plan, the 4 name roles, it all comes together here in a single realistic scenario walkthrough in real time. So the scenario: a mid-sized financial services firm has been using an AI resume screening tool for 14 months. A hiring manager sends an email to HR at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning. She states that she has noticed something troubling. No candidates from a specific university have passed the screening stage in over a year. And let me make this clear. This particular university is probably one of the #1 universities here in Canada, but specifically in Toronto. So is this troubling? Despite what she considers to be a strong application oversight, the university she named has a higher proportion of first-generation students. That is a signal. Now, how would you apply the LAPC model? I want you to do this on your own and go through it, assess it. I'm not going to sit down and tell you what's going to happen. I want you to write it up and we'll go from there. But remember, you're using all the lessons that we learned: listen, assess, plan, and commit. So I'm presuming that you have put me on pause and now you're back. So listen. The hiring manager's email is the listening channel function. It is not an accident. It is not channel 2. User signal captures. It's operating exactly as designed. The email is documented, timestamped, and routed to the name of the monitor within the hour. Simultaneously, override rates data for the past 14 months is pulled for review. This was possible because the output monitoring channel was in place. Without it, the 14 months history would not be immediately accessible. So where does this fall back? External feedback. Under MAP 5.2, under Risk Management Framework, under NIST AI. Practice and personal for supporting regular engagement with relevant AI actors and integrating feedback about positive, negative, and anticipated impact are in place and documented. Lesson, we go down to assess. The 4 triage questions. Question 1, how many are affected? Potentially a large application pool at this point because the university, it's a specific university for 14 months. So plus any other screens by the same weighing parameters. Question 2 is the harm ongoing? And the answer is yes. The system is actively processing new applications right now. And what we're seeing is the same group of individuals from the same specific university are being declined. Question 3 is is a vulnerable population involved? Well, first generation students are an economically marginalized group, right? The answer is yes. Question 4, are other systems connected? Legal asks immediately about the screening tools in the application workflow. The answer requires checking the AI inventory. The tier assignment is tier 2, contained. So that means the manage function under risk management format, requirement to determine whether deployment should be proceeded immediately, is relevant. So you would have to shut down the system and review it before you can get it back up running, right? And under manage 1.1, under NIST AI risk management framework, quote unquote, a determination is made as to whether the AI system achieve its intended purpose and stand objective, and whether its deployment or development should be proceeded. And in this case, it would be deployed, right? Should not be proceeded, excuse me. We're going to de-deploy it. Plan. The planning activities, incident owner activated at 9:47 a.m. The AI system is suspended for a new application by 10:15 a.m. and by the end of the 32 minutes after the triage completion. So internal notifications sent by 10:30 a.m. using the pre-written tier 2 template. Remember, we had to write a template. Legal and HR were notified simultaneously, and all decisions made by the system in the past 14 months are flagged for manual review. So the pre-written communication template for affected applicants is prepared but not yet sent. It requires an incident owner signing off. So regulatory contacts begin preparing notification for the relevant provincial human rights body. And usually someone will be assigned, a member of the Human Rights Ontario in this case, would be assigned. And they would review the case before actually reaching out to different people. Commit. The commitment is name accountability, incident owner named, affected population liaison assigned to contact the university's recruiting office and every applicant whose application was preceded during the effective period. Regulatory contact prepares the Human Rights Commission notification with the required documentation. Post-incident reviewer, an external equity consultant with no prior involvement in the system procurement or deployment, is assigned within the 72 hours review deadline from the moment the system is suspended. The review timeline is documented. The reactivation conditions are documented. The organization is now in a defensible governance position. They're protected. They're accounted for, not because the failure did not happen, but because the response was structured, named, timely, consistent, confined, transparent, and documented. That is a lab model that is applied to a real scenario, from a signal to structural response in under 2 hours, without panic, without improvisation, without the 3 freeze patterns. Again, these are your questions. Feel free to respond to them. Sometimes I find these questions again overlap, but there's a reason they overlap, because they really challenge your judgment and your ethics and your outlook and perspective into really questioning your comprehension about how to deal with a situation if AI was involved. And for some people, this may mean absolutely nothing. You might think, well, it has nothing to do with me, but if you're a frontline worker and you're working with AI software, you are accountable. God forbid if you are working in the financial area and you're auditing, and you're using an AI software, and that software ends up giving you the wrong outlook or output or results, and you don't double check. And let me tell you, there's a large population of people, don't quote me, that do not double check their work. It happens all the time. And even someone like me, who can be quite anal when I'm working, make that error once in a while. Now, before we close, I want to be explicit about the sources behind this model. The primary sources for everything in this model is the NIST Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Framework 1.0, AI 100-1, published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology in January 2023. The document is available for free of charge at the link in the description. I quoted directly at 14 points, I think, through this lesson, and every code is referenced by section so you can see it for yourself. Supplementary resources are also available. You can always contact me if you need me for anything. I am on LinkedIn. A couple times I posted my LinkedIn, but they keep deleting it, so I'm not really sure why. And I really hope that you enjoyed this session. This module, again, is number 3. The 6 lessons, a complete AI crisis response methodology grounded in NIST AI risk management framework and built on LAPP model for crisis intervention practice. You now understand why organizations freeze and the 3 structure fixed that prevent it. You have a 5-channel listening protocol with names, roles, and reviews and schedules, a 4-question triage process that produces severity tier in 30 minutes. 6 components: written incident response plan, 4 name accountability rows, and a full simulation walkthrough of a realistic AI scenario. So model 4 is called Governing Human Behavior Inside AI System. It is where we go deeper into the psychological and organizational dynamics that determines whether your governance structures actually function in practice, or whether they exist on paper and dissolve under pressure, which happens quite often. It is where Goldman's emotional intelligence framework meets AI risk, where Tuckerman's group development model meets compliance and implementation, and where the question is not just whether your organization has the right structure, but whether the people inside have the capacity to use them. Now, before we go, this course is free. It will stay free. Every module, every framework, every template, that is a commitment I'm making to you and to this community. But you and I both know that nothing is actually free in life. Someone invested the time, the research, the production, the consistency. In that case, that's all me right now. And the way this channel grows, the way I can keep it producing content at this level is through your support. Your follow, your subscription, sharing this video with one person in your field who governs AI or needs the framework, leaving a comment that can, contributes to the community where we are building here. This channel is part of something I'm building for long term, a body of free, rigorous, evidence-based AI governance education that is accessible to anyone, anywhere, regardless of their technical background, their budget, their gender. Your follow and your share are what makes it suitable and sustainable. So if a module 3 gave you something real, share it. That is the exchange I'm asking for you. Run the simulation, come back and tell me what you thought of it. Your friend, Dr. T. Thank you so much for your time, everyone.